Hi, this is Everett. Everett's Watercolors. Welcome to my classroom. Now today I got a little painting here that I've done with just two colors, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I think you're going to like the results. And this is a good opportunity also to paint along with me. I'm going to do a download sketch on the description below. You can download the sketch and draw it on a piece of watercolor paper, and then paint along with me step by step. I've got all the instructions or all the examples from beginning to end, from start to finish. And then you can post that on my Facebook page. I've got the link to the Facebook page called Fun with Watercolors. You can download your painting there and let me take a look at it. I really enjoyed to see what you did. So let's go to my painting table and let's get started. Okay, this little painting here is a landscape painting. And let me show you the material I'm going to use. This is the general sketch I have. It's going to have a sky, mountains, buildings, some ground level, a road, and some trees. Okay, that's the landscape. And this was the sketch. And on this particular painting, what I'm going to do, I'm going to use two colors. I'm going to use ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. Oh, and let me go over the other materials. I'm going to have, this is a 3/4 inch flat brush by Holbein. And this is a number 6 round brush. These are all natural hair. These are all synthetic. And this is a number 4 rigger. These are the 3 brushes I'm going to use in the painting. So on my palette, this is the burnt sienna. Mix up a nice quantity of that. So that's one of the colors I'm using. Burnt sienna. Rinse out my brush in my rinse bucket. Take out the extra water. Clean water over here to mix up fresh color. And this is the ultramarine. This is going to be also experimental painting. I'm going to use 2 colors. And what I'll do here is do certain mixtures, and you'll see the mixtures. This is really a good exercise in mixing paintings, mixing the colors in a painting. I'm going to start with the sky. Let me put this color down here, and then I'm going to move my sketch over. This is my sketch, which I showed you, but then I've transferred it to a 10 by 8.5 by 10 piece of watercolor paper. This is 140-pound cold press Gemini watercolor paper, and I made the sketch. I used the grid system here to move it over. Yeah, first thing I'll do is I mixed up some of my ultramarine violet here for the sky. But before I start, I'm going to pre-wet the sky. So I'm going to take the 1-inch Holbein synthetic brush and put it in water, and then I'm going to pre-wet the sky. So putting a little water up there, that'll help that sky color, or any color, will help it flow down the page a little smoother. I'm going to have the sky being a nice smooth application of blue paint, and therefore that wet paper will help the paint flow much better. I'll load up the 3/4 inch flat brush, and I'll start with the top level sky. And you can see that brush holds a lot of paint going all the way across the paper. And continue on down. And I'm going to put the water in the brush as I go down to lighten up the value as I move down from top to bottom. It'll be getting lighter. So I'm adding water to the brush to give me a graded wash in the sky. And I'm going to pick up a little bit of the sienna mixed in with water and start blending that in to the sky also. So I start out with a cool color at the top. Then I'm going to move down to a warmer color toward the horizon, about where where the buildings and so forth are located. And I'm going to paint around the buildings. I'm going to leave some white paper there because the sun, I'm going to have the sun coming from the right side all the way across the left. So from right to left will be the lighting. So I want to keep those front side of the buildings will show white, because they'll be they have white boards or white paint, so that'll show up as part of my impact area also. That'll give me a lot of interest back there. And I plan to put a lot of darker colors behind those whites to make it really pop out. So here I'm painting around the buildings in the middle ground landscape. And that burnt sienna also covers up, there'll be some mountains behind that, so I'm covering up with that color also, because I'm going to put a darker color back there behind the building, so this will cover up some of that burnt sienna anyway. And it'll also give me a mixture of colors. Now as I move down a little further here into the middle ground, I'm going to cover across there with that burnt sienna, and I'm going to vary the values. The brush strokes are going to be fairly flat. I'm covering in. I'll pick up a little bit of that ultramarine blue as I come forward. I'll have a little cooler foreground. The foreground will be a little cooler than the middle ground. And lightening up, just pick up a tissue to lighten up one of those areas, because the sun's going to come across there, and I want it to hit that part of the ground. Over here I'm adding a little more burnt sienna on the right side, and going to go down the right side of the pathway. There's a roadway that goes up to the middle part of my landscape, up toward the impact area, so I'm going to paint around that road right now with the burnt sienna. Smoothing out the wash here with just a brush full of water. Now I'm picking up a little bit of ultramarine. Mix it in with the burnt sienna. It gives me a beautiful gray. Mixing burnt sienna and ultramarine blue gives me my gray. That's my go-to gray. I really love it. Now here I'm painting in the roadway going up to the impact area, that building on the right. And as I come down, the gray color is going to fill in the roadway. And I'm going to start there a little bit darker at the top, and as I move down toward the bottom of the into the foreground, I'm going to lighten up that value a little bit. So put a little water in the brush and just kind of blend that wash out at the very bottom of the road there. Then going back into the burnt sienna, going out to the right bottom side of the foreground. I'm working on the foreground now with the burnt sienna. I'll be putting a lot more color in here as I go along. But this puts the light value layer of the colors into the landscape. Now I'm smoothing out some of the wash with just a damp brush. And I've got a fence post over here that I covered up with that burnt sienna, so I'm lifting out some of that with just a tissue. While the paint's still wet, I can lift it out, because I want that to be a lighter value there on that side. I'm going to add a little more color to the sky. I think it got a little bit light on me. Was it drying? It dries lighter. So I'm putting another layer of blue, ultramarine blue at the top to increase the value of that blue sky. And then I'm going to pick up a little bit of burnt sienna and blend that in with the blue to give me that light gray as I come down toward the horizon line, which is right behind those white buildings. Now, I've got the blue sky across the top, which is cool, and as I come down, I got warmer. I used the burnt sienna to give me a warm value in the middle ground. As I come forward, I'm going to go cool again with a little bit of ultramarine blue on top of that. So the light's coming from the right side to the left side. That's the source of light. Now I'm going to let that dry before I start the next layering of color. Okay, the paint is dry, and now I'm going to take the number 6 round, and I'm going to add. I'm going to start in. Now this was the light. This was a lighter value. This was a light value. Just some of the areas that were lighter. Now I'm going to put in the middle value. Now I'm going to start with a little burnt sienna, and now I'm going to go ahead and define some of these shapes around this here. There's a tree, there's a building here, but there's a tree behind the building. Hey, this middle value is a little bit darker value of the burnt sienna, and this gives me a nice color for the trees and for the vegetation around these buildings. So now I'm just taking my time here. I'm going to be using this number 6 round of synthetic brush from Holbein, and that gives me a nice control of the actual sizes, the brush strokes. And I'm moving here on the shadow side of this building. I putting a little burnt sienna for the shadow, a little bit on the roof, just to give a little bit of side shadow. Then I added a little chimney on the top there of the building. And I'm going to put a little cast shadow across the front of that building. And you'll see in a minute, I'm going to be a tree out there. There's the tree. I'm putting the tree in, which will cast a shadow on the front side of that building. This tree is a little bit bigger, but again, I'm just taking my time and make a nice shape here, leaving a little bit of the original color behind, coming through. Here, painting around the right edge of the tree, and using just burnt sienna, just the color of burnt sienna on top of that tree. This could be an autumn scene where you have oranges and browns and so forth, autumn colors here on the tree. So this could be an autumn scene, which I'm going to make it. And off here to the right, there's a small hill that I'm going to paint in some of the bushes and tall grass here on top of this little hill. And then that hill goes down, and there's another tree on the other side of the roadway there. The roadway goes up here by this building on the right, and it goes between the trees up here, the roadway. And I'm going to put in a shadow on this building here on the right. Just another white building on the right. I'm putting a shadow on the left side from the light side. Put a little shadow, putting a little of the burnt sienna on the rooftop also. Then continue around with that color of burnt sienna. Put in some little bit of grass around the house. And there's a tree here on the right, a large tree. It's in front of this white house. So I'm adding the trunks here. Building the trunks, this tree will be a much bigger, biggest tree in the landscape. Here I'm building the tree structure with tree trunks. It'll be more openness here. Now, putting in the branches and the leaves, I'm putting in the groupings. And this is a large grouping of leaves at the very top of the tree. And that's one grouping of leaves. And then I find a smaller grouping, or a medium-sized grouping of leaves. And so instead of painting each individual leaf, I'm painting the groupings of different sizes. Just like I would do in a garden with flowers. I would, rather than paint the individual flowers, I'd do groupings of the colors of the flowers. The same idea here. Then continuing around, there's a little more grass and some low bushes over here on the right side of the landscape, on the top of this hill with this building. Then I'm going to put a little more burnt sienna over here. I'm going to put a little color and add in a little bit of the ultramarine blue. There's a little bit of shadow pattern over here on the left side, on the ground. And that burnt sienna and ultramarine blue gives me a nice combination of colors. Gives me light and dark values. It makes a beautiful gray. It also gives me a nice dark burnt sienna. It gives me a dark brown. It also almost give me a black if I mix them close enough. Now this little hill has a little embankment here. It goes next to the road. So I'm putting in some of that structure there of this bank that goes down toward the roadway from that little hill where the house is on. So that'll come on down toward the foreground. And then I'll put a little darker, some darker value of burnt sienna. I mean, these are some little weeds and grass growing along this edge of the road to define the roadway. Then off to the right, I'm painting around this fence post. There's a big white fence post here in the foreground, and I'm going to paint around that, adding some more ultramarine blue to put some more shadow patterns and some more darkness in the dark values in the ground. Putting a little darker value around that fence post so it stands out. Putting a dark against the light makes it really shine out. And now I'm using little vertical strokes here with the round brush. This will give me the impression of weeds or tall grass. Here's some more tall grass over here next to the roadway. And using that vertical stroke with the burnt sienna will give me that tall grass, and adding a little bit of ultramarine blue in there gives me some of the shadow patterns, some of the dark areas. Adding in some more ultramarine blue. Here I'm planning on showing a shadow coming from the right-hand side. It could be another tree or a large bush on the right side outside of the painting area, but it's casting a shadow across the landscape. So this is just building up this middle ground texture in some of the foreground. I'm going to have to let that dry. Now I'm going to work on the background dark areas, and this will be the last phase of some of the painting here. I'm going to mix up a real dark gray, ultramarine, very thick, lots of paint there. With you can see me mixing up on my palette, and then I'm going to add in the burnt sienna straight out of the palette, and I'm going to mix them together. That makes a very dark brown, very dark brown. And the more blue I add into that, it really almost turns it black. But it's a very dark color, and that's what I want just behind the middle ground to show off those middle ground trees and other features. I'm going to take the number 6 round brush, and I'm going to start putting in those background mountains with that very dark mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I'm going to go down and define the edge of those middle ground trees, which were put in with the middle value burnt sienna, and very carefully going around and defining the edges. This way I can get that characteristic of the tree and define the shape with that dark background. Here I'm using the point of the brush loaded with that dark mixture. And I come up around the rooftop of that building and around the chimney there. So I'm also defining around that. And also now I'm moving over to the edge of the building, the roof edge, and then down by the side of that tree. Then I'm covering that shadow that's being a cast shadow from that tree onto the white building there, the little cast shadow. Then on the other side of the tree, I'm going to put, again, the background behind that tree, defining that mountain or hill mass behind, defining the edges using the tip of the number 6 round artificial synthetic brush, Holbein. That holds a lot of paint. That does a really nice job of detail. Then down there next to the bush there, making little bushes there going along the edge next to that road, and coming down and defining that hill, the hill mass down there to then crossing the road, putting that background color in there, and then now defining the edge, the left edge of that little tree next to the other building. And here I'm putting a little rough edge on those Don't want any straight lines, but kind of a different edge on even on the mountains in the background. Now just detailing the edge of this little tree next to the other building, and making sure I have a different edge. Looks like limbs coming off the tree on the edge. Now define the base of that tree. So this background color is dark with you can see some of the burnt sienna showing through also there in the background. So this mixture of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna is coming up here next to the rooftop now. Now I'm defining this rooftop on this particular building. Defining the edge. And coming across the top, there's a couple little chimney tops up there on the top of this building. Little shapes up there, just painting around them. And down the right side of the roof. So this dark color now really is defining that middle value burnt sienna color that I put down before in the middle ground. Now defining the edge of the roof coming down. There's a little small structure there on the right, and also off the right of that larger building. And then working on the tree, defining or outlining the tree, going around behind the tree trunk and the tree limbs to define that tree shape. Then moving over to the right edge, the rest of that background hill mass back there. Make sure I got the different angles and different lengths of those slopes. Then filling in with that burnt sienna and ultramarine blue mixture. Defining the edges of that little white building, a little extension there. And there's a couple little light bushes over here on the horizon line here. So I'll define those, come around the edges, leave a little of that lighter color to define those little bushes there on the horizon line with that black color behind. So this is a classic dark against light to show that particular character or that particular object off. Now going back over to the left, I'm going to I'm filling in some of the little spots left in the background. Make sure they're covered. And I'm adding some burnt sienna in there just to give it a little texture and give it some of those brown trees back there on the hill mass. That burnt sienna will show up when the paint dries, and it'll show a little color change. Now adding in details, I'm using the number 4 rigger, Holbein rigger, which is a nice synthetic brush that I use a lot for my landscapes. And I'm going to use some more dark colors. Now here, when I load the brush on the edge, now I'm going to go back and do a little detail back here on the horizon line, kind of break up that shape a little bit, make a little more interesting shape there on the horizon. And then loading up the brush with that dark, I'm going to put a shadow on this shadow side of this white building here on the left. So this is the shadow side of the building. That black, or that dark, I call it black, but it's very dark. That dark value, dark brown now, really shows off that white. With that black against that white, really, the contrast there is an outstanding example of black against white. And then a little shadow pattern on the eaves. A little shadow along the chimney. And a light value there, make it a gray. If I put the burnt sienna, put the ultramarine over that burnt sienna on the roof, it'll turn out to be a gray mixture. There I'm adding a little chimney there there's another part of that structure there in the horizon line. It just shows there's something going on back there. It's another part of that building. Another extension of that particular building house with a shadow on the side. Now I'm putting a little texture into the trees, so I'm just showing little parts of the branches, little parts of the leaves, and also the light's coming from the right to the left. So I'm making the left side of the trees a little darker to show the shadow side. Leave a little bit of light color showing. Here I'm putting in the dark, some little dark areas here on the window, and another, possibly the door to that little white house, a little ranch house, a little farmhouse. Then off here, this building on the right, I'm going to put the shadow side in here on this one. Again, that dark against that light is really going to make it pop out. So this dark mixture of ultramarine and burnt sienna makes a very nice dark color. And then I'm filling in the shadow on the shadow side of this building with the light coming from the right side to the left. Now that defines that side of the building very nicely. I'm going to put a little light gray on top of this roof to give it a light gray value on top of the rooftop. And a little texture in the tree here. Again, the shading in the left side, the shadow side of that particular little tree. Now mixing up some darks, put a little window up here on the big white house, and another window down on the first floor, and adding a small doorway there in the back, and another door to that little extension on the right of that particular building. Then put in some shadows in the eaves at the edge of the roof, putting that little shadow pattern in there with ultramarine and burnt sienna mix. And a little shadow under that little extension on the house there, a little structure. Now, working on the trees, what I'm doing is adding, again, some shadows on the shadow side of the tree, adding a little darker value of the burnt sienna mixture to show the shadow side of the tree with the light coming from the right to the left. So that gives me a little darker values in that particular subject matter there. That really does a good job on the tree. I like the way that turned out. It's against the sky and everything. Turned out real nice. Now I'm adding some limbs and branches to the top there. So those gaps there that I left behind the groups of leaves, now I can fill in with some limbs and small branches. That's one of the reasons for leaving a little space there in the tree, to give a little more interest, to show the structure and show some of the characteristics of a particular large tree like this. Would have large limbs and branches branching out to the top of the tree. There I'm putting a little shadow along the edge of the trunk there. A little shadow on the left edge. Now I'm going to work on the shadow pattern. I'm mixing up a little darker mix here, adding more ultramarine blue to that puddle. Going to make a nice dark mix. You can see I'm adding more of the ultramarine blue in with that burnt sienna to give me a nice dark value. It's a dark brown or almost a dark gray. Makes a beautiful dark gray color, this combination. And over here is a cast shadow from the buildings onto the road, onto the pathway. So this cast shadow is going to be dark, and it's going to come across the roadway from the tall grass, and there's a little bank here on the right also. There's a bank on the left and a bank on the right. So there'll be a little shadow coming down across that road, cast by the light source on the right-hand side. And putting a little more definition of the weeds and the texture down here in the foreground. Little taller grass strokes, a little taller grass. Now up here around the building now, there's a cast shadow from that tree on the ground. So that gives me an opportunity to define that house up there, or that barn, a little better with a dark edge. And coming down to put a little dark around this fence post again. That sets off that fence post very well. And the fence post is a good directional indicator toward the impact area. So that's another good thing for that. So putting little darks up there, a little hill mass coming down toward the roadway, casting shadows. And then I'm building that shadow pattern here in the foreground. Cast shadow from the right side. It could be a tree or a large bush casting a shadow across there. It also breaks up that foreground a little bit, give a little more interest. And then putting some edges there of the tall grass using that dark mixture of burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. And using the edge of the brush. Now, this is the rigger, and I'm using the edge of the side of the brush now, moving it up and down. This gives me, I love this brush because I can do a lot of other textures besides just the point. Using the side of the brush and using an up and down side up stroke, I can get fantastic texture. In this case here, rough weeds, grass, and the terrain down here with this tall grass and so forth gives me an opportunity to use this brush. And then doing the horizontal strokes, adding in some more shadow, using the side of that brush, using the edge of that rigger brush is very effective. And just patting it down on the side, another way of using the rigger brush. Then off to the left, there's some shadows there from the terrain. It's not all level. There's little grooves and bumps and little bumps and rises in the ground. So the little shadows up there on that hill and down here along the edge of the road, a little more definition, a little more lights and darks. I'm going back and adding a little more shadow patterns to this roadway. This will break up that roadway shape, make it a little more interesting. It tells a story of the light coming across the pathway. And there's a nice shadow coming from that post, or from that tree or bush from the right side. And here's another shadow casting down from the tall weeds and from that tall post. So we got a lot of things going on here with the shadow pattern going across the road. And that helps break up that little flat structure and gives a little characteristic down there. It also shows the shape of the terrain. Now we got a shadow cast shadow on that post there standing there. A little cast shadow from somewhere. From the shading from the right hand side, casting a shadow against that white post. Adding some more darks in that foreground just to break up that brown burnt sienna area. Now I'm adding in some more shadows. Again, add more interest, a little more contrast down here. This is the foreground. It can be a lot darker, a lot more detail here in the foreground because it's closer. It's in the forward area of the painting, so it can have a lot more definition. We're seeing it up close, so it can be seen much easier. So a little more detail in the foreground is okay. Now I took that same rigger with a lot of dark mixture now with the ultramarine, and I'm going to use turn the brush in my hand to form a sharp point, and now I'm going to put in some fence posts. The fence posts are going to start here in front of the building up here, in front of the barn. And it'll go across the landscape there. Somewhere, it's almost the horizon line, but pretty close. And then it's going to start sloping down toward the foreground. So the fence is going to come forward. Again, this is another good directional path leading into the impact area. The impact area is that white building with the big tree. I think that's the impact area. So the fence line will also point in that direction, give us a directional path, along with the roadway gives us a path. Now this edge, the tip of that rigger brush, now I'm putting in a wire, and that's a perfect example of what the rigger is used for making fine lines. I'm going to pause here and take a look, put the mat over top, take a look at where we are, and things are looking pretty good. I like what's happening. I'm going to make a few more changes here though. So with that mat, I've noticed that the post there is white, so I'm going to mix up a little gray with the burnt sienna and ultramarine blue, and I'm going to put a shadow pattern on that white post to knock it down just a little bit. It's competing with the impact area, so I'm going to put a shadow pattern on that, which is a shadow on the left side, with the right side being the lighter side. Put a little shadow pattern there on that post. That'll knock that big white down, so it won't be as bright as the impact area. So that's in competition. So that's a good thing to do when you look around the painting to see what is competing with the impact area. Now, here's another thing I wanted. This is a special technique here. I'm using Wet Media Acetate, which is watercolor friendly, and I painted a figure on this, and now I'm locating. I'm trying to get a good location for where I want to put a figure. So the figure size and the figure position is I painted on this Wet Media Acetate, then I can show it on my painting. And I got a little dog on there also. So now I'm going to, again, reposition that perfectly where I want it. Double check myself, get my paint ready. Dark color. This is going to be a mixture of ultramarine and burnt sienna. So it'll be a dark black color is what I want to use, or dark brown color. Then I'm going to do a little test here, just show you the figure is basically just going to be really a blob, just a mark on the paper, and with some indications of a head, the head there, and the legs, and maybe an arm. He's going to be carrying something, maybe a bucket of water in one hand on the right, and on the left-hand side his arm can be out, and he's talking to his little partner there, his little friend, his little dog. So now I'm going to go ahead and put that figure in there now. Now I know where it is, what I want to do with it. Now I'm going to double check myself. I'm going to put that shape back on it. Okay, I'll really pinpoint where I want to put it in terms of the size and position. This gives me a chance to double check. Now I know where I want it. Okay, then I go ahead and paint it in. So I memorize the size I want to put and where I want to put it. Then I paint that figure in, or that subject that I want to put in there. So this can be used in any kind of technique with watercolor. If you want to design something before you paint it on your actual painting, you use the Wet Media Acetate to do your design work or your practice, and then find out how big you want it and what location you want to put it on, and that gives you a chance to plan ahead before you actually do it. There I'm painting the bucket there on the right hand side, and now I'm painting in his left arm, and there's Farmer Bob and his little pal Skippy. They're walking up the hill to the farmhouse. Then I indicate his head on top of his shoulders there. I'll make his legs a little bit longer to go with the size of the shape I want. And then add a little shadow pattern from the path of light coming from the right to the left, a little shadow pattern the nail, put him down on the ground, and the little dog on the ground, little Skippy. Now, trying to look with the mat board, take a look at it. Hey, it looks pretty good. I think I've got pretty well done. I like that. I'm going to call this one Best Friends by Everetts Watercolors. And there's another shot of the final painting. I think it turned out great. All the material I used today was the Holbein watercolors and everything, and the paper and the Wet Media Acetate are all available at everettswatercolors.com. Don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Select the bell to be notified of my next video. Give me a thumbs up, it helps in my rating. Don't forget to download the sketch in my comments below and to post them on my Facebook page, which is also in the link below. Leave me some comments and questions, I'll get back to you. See you on my next video.